Greetings, this is Dr. Senthamare, Department of English, Vistas. Welcome to the online degree program. Literary forms is offered for UG students in semester 1. We are in week 1, lecture 1. In this lecture, we are going to see the introductory part of literary forms. We are going to discuss about the overview of literary forms. What is the definition of literary forms in the first place? Literary forms is how a text is structured and it's a general arrangement of words to form meaning. Every literary form has a set of structure which helps readers to classify the kind of work it is. Some literary forms are defined by the length, like the novel, novella or short story. Some forms are defined by the number of lines, like the sonnet or haiku. The literary forms extends itself to prose, fiction, drama, non-fiction and poetry depending on the length depending on the arrangement of words. It also talks about the manner of the text, the style of construction, arranging, coordination of the parts of a sentence to compose a text. Literary forms follows a structuralist approach to the study of genre and genre theory in literary theory, film theory and other cultural theories. The study of genre is the way it examines the structural elements that combine in telling the stories or telling the text. Literary forms, what's the significance, what's the objective or what's the importance of studying literary forms? It helps us to analyze, it helps us to understand, it helps us to identify or interpret, describe the critical ideas, values and themes of a literary text. Literary devices work alongside plot, characters to elevate a story and prompt a reflection of life, society and what it means to be a human. And what happens when we analyze a text? When analyzing a text and when responding to a text, it helps the readers to understand how a writer uses the form, structure and language used to think about the effect on the reader. To put it simply, literary form is a name of the text type that the writer uses. There are few genres of literary text. But before that, let's see what's the difference between a form and a genre. In fact, is there a difference between form and genre? Yes and no. There is a divided opinion on the difference of form and genre, which means to say form is a general term referred to use a type of text and genre is a technical term to refer to the types of text. But anyways, form is a overall or umbrella term to classify novel, short story, essay, poem, play, whereas genre has specifications of forms. Say for example, if you take a category of media, literature, movie, music and so on, they have a similar content and they have a similar pattern of arrangement. And if you take another example of literature and movies, we talk about romance, we talk about comedy, we talk about horror, action, fantasy and so on. So talking about the subcategories of the form or genre, we can take another example of literature and movies. We have romance, comedy, horror, action, fantasy, science fiction. If you divide or if you narrow down to subgenres, we can talk about music for example, and we have got many kinds of music, for example, rock, rap, classical, hip hop, country music and so on and so forth. So this is actually about the difference between forms and genres. And if you look at this picture, probably this will help you to understand what is what in detail. So literary genres are classified into 4 major divisions. First is fiction or non-fiction, and the third one is a poetry, and the fourth one is a drama. On what is fiction? Fiction is nothing but the imagination. Imaginary writing or imaginary creation of a writer is called a fiction. A non-fiction is not imaginary, but it's a real fact. It talks about the fact. And come back to fiction. It is classified again into subgenres, novels, short stories, myths, tales and legends. And if you take all the 5, the length of the 5 would be more or less the same except short stories and tales or myths. Novels will have the extended length, say for example, certainly not less than 100, whereas short stories can have like 10, 15 or even less than that. So length is the one which differentiates or which gives the identity of the name short stories. Alright, so all these 5 are called fiction because this is purely imagination. And when we talk about non-fiction, we have diaries, biographies, essays, speeches, and autobiographies. These are all based on purely realistic or real datas. Diary, what we write after we go home every day, it's a journal writing. It's also called a journal writing. An extended form of diary would be biographies, where we end up writing one's life or one's own life, others' life, like biography and autobiography. And same thing with essays and speeches. So this is non-fiction category. And then we have poetry and drama. Poetry again is a creation of the mind. You have sonnets, ballads, pastorals, lyrics and songs. We will discuss everything in detail in the later lectures. Again, this is actually the organization of words and the choice of words. The most important thing which is required for poetry composition is diction. The diction is nothing but the choice of words that we use. And then we have drama. Drama again is kind of long in length. It is longer than poetry. We also have poetic drama like epics and all. So we have comedies, tragedies, tragicomedies, farce, melodrama, and so on. All right. So this is again the category of names like comedies and tragedies. Talks about the mood and the content of the. So we are talking about the kinds and so on. Now we will move on to the literary forms elements. What are the elements of the literary elements? First one is the character, setting, plot, theme, frame, exposition, ending, motive, narrative point of view. All right. So first of all, we will talk about the character, without which the novel is incomplete, or without which novel cannot be constructed. All right. Because we need to have a character. Character can be animate, inanimate, it can be human, non-human. And when you talk about character, we have got two important characterization, which is protagonist and antagonist. And who is a protagonist? A person, the embodiment of all the goods is called a protagonist. So who is the protagonist? The embodiment of good or the personification of good is a protagonist. And who is antagonist? It's the opposite of protagonist. The embodiment of all evil is called an antagonist. So these are the two very important characterization which we find in the novel or in any piece of writing. All right. So a piece of literature has to have at least one character, which can be a person, object, or animal. There are many types of characters: dynamic character, flat character, round character, archetypes, and so on and so forth. And then the next element is the setting. So what do you mean by a setting? If you can refer back to R.K. Narayan's Malgudi Days, perhaps the one best example that I can refer now is Malgudi Days. Malgudi village is purely an imaginary village created by the writer. There is no such village in existence right now, but he created his own place, he created his own characters, he created his own life. All right. So setting is a place where we usually fix in or fit in the characters and the plot so as the happening has to happen. I hope you understand. The happening has to happen. So this is the setting. And what do you talk about? Plot. What do you mean by the plot? Plot is nothing but a sequence of events that occurs from the first line to the last. So without again which plot or without plot, the text will not exist in the first place, right? So in other words, the plot is what exactly happens in the story. So setting helps the plot to happen. All right. So this is the plot. So all literature has a plot of some kind. So look at the word some kind. Most long form literature like novel, play follows a pretty typical plot structure, also known as a plot arc. It's actually called plot arc. And this plot arc or this typical plot structure has 6 elements. And what are the 6? First is the beginning. You have to have a starting point and you will have a conflict. So in the starting point, we will actually have all the stories. Beginning, the characters introduces themselves, the setting introduces themselves, and the event, the theme is introduced. All the introduction of the main criteria or main components of the novel or the text will be in the beginning. And the conflict, next one is the conflict. The conflict, just like is in real life, the conflict is the problem of a story. So as the characters will have a chance to tackle it, so as the characters have a chance to solve it, because without which again the text will loses its zest. I mean, it loses its essence. All right. So there are two types of conflict that we will see in a plot. First is the major conflict, second is the minor conflict. And what is the major conflict? It is a very big conflict of the entire book or entire text, which is usually the major characters will deal. And of course, we will have a minor conflicts which are dealt by the minor characters. All right. And then the next component of the plot is the rising action. What do you mean by the rising action? So we have the beginning. It's like a curve. You have a beginning and then you have the rising. It goes up. All right. Everything happens. The story takes a gradual step towards the peak. All right. So moving forward is called a rising action. And then we have the climax. And what do we do in climax? The climax of the plot is a part of the story where the characters finally have to face and solve the major conflict. This is called the peak. All right. And then the falling action. So you have a race, you have the peak, and then you have the fall. So what happens? It's actually called resolution or just before the resolution. What happens? Things takes smooth or things go in a smooth direction. Conflicts is resolved. So we are going to the just before the final. So resolution is the conclusion of the story. All right. So it doesn't mean it is the every single problem is resolved or happily or satisfactory, but something comes to an end is called a resolution. It can be positive or negative, it can be likely or unlikely, but there is a resolution. There has to be a resolution, right? So this is the another component of literary forms, the elements of literary forms. And then next is the mood. Again, an important aspect of literary forms or literary text. What do you mean by the mood? We are angry, we are hungry, we are upset, we are happy, we are elated. All depends on our psychological effect. So everything is reflected in the text. So that is the mood. So the mood of a piece of literature is defined as the emotion or feeling that readers get from reading the words on a page. Actually, it happens. When you read a wonderful text, it takes you in. I mean to say that when you read, you feel like crying. When you read, you feel like empathizing with the characters. Or when you read, you feel as if you are in that position, in that situation. That is the mood. So when the writer creates the mood in you, then he is successful in creating a novel. All right. And then the theme. What do you mean by the theme? Theme, for example, is the major concept or main concept of any literary text is called a theme. So, for example, Romeo and Juliet, the theme is the love. And Antony and Cleopatra, it's the fall. Again, love, but love which leads to fall. And the wonderful example again I can give you is the Othello, it's jealous, right? So these are the major themes. So sometimes themes is described as the main idea of the work. But more accurately, themes are any ideas that appear repeatedly throughout a text. All right. Sometimes we may have multiple themes. And then we have a narrative point of view. What do I mean by narrative point of view? When you read Sujata's novel, or when you read Charles Dickens, or when you read R.K. Narayan's novels, some novels will have I as a narrator. Some novels have the names as a narrator. Some novels will have the you as a narrator. Usually it is uncommon to see you as a narrator. You is a second person. It is mostly not possible. Either I write from my point of view or I write in somebody's point of view. So that somebody's point of view becomes third person narrative and my point of view becomes a first person narrative. So this is a narrative point of view. All right. So these are the literary elements of the literary forms. Okay. So in this video or in this lecture, we have seen what is the literary forms, the introduction. The next video we will talk about the poetry, the very major genre of literature. Thank you.